kind of the
I am ready to go. Go ahead.
Perfect. So we are going to go to the slide about cost. So when it comes to cost at this point, what we have is just the fire code component. And so I can turn that over to Rick. We were actually just talking about that we're going to connect with some additional organizations to get the cost for kind of the affordable housing piece and more of the energy side of it. So would you like us to go over the fire pieces now? The goal would be to have more information when we come back before the Board of Trustees on April with some more cost data. Or would you like to go over fire code costs? Okay, Rick, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Hi, Kathleen. So this information here on this page was developed by Headwaters Economic, which looks at primarily wildfire costs and other land use costs kind of around the West. I wouldn't be too concerned with the total numbers at the top because we all know that when you look at a large region, those numbers tend to be low. If you look at here, they tend to be high. But you can see there that by their evaluation, the cost of building a typical home versus a wildfire resistant home is fairly similar. They're showing the biggest decrease that cost is in exterior walls, the siding. And that's primarily because things like hardy board are cheaper than most wood products. There's some pretty cheap wood products out there that'll come in about the same price, but they are, like I said, they're pretty cheap. They're not what people are typically looking for in a house. Why don't we go to the next page? I think that's got some better cost information. I think it's the next one. Okay, yeah, and this is one that I put together based on conversations with a bunch of the builders in town, looking at kind of generic costs for different things that we're looking at. First one is siding there in the left column. You know, basic wood, nothing real fancy, but not hardy, is about $4 a square foot to put up. Cheap wood, like they call it a press board, is about $3 a square foot. Hardy falls about the same there. A little harder to deal with. And again, these costs are average. Stucco is up at 4. Stone probably starts at 16, goes up. Other things like metal or brick or any of that's probably also going to be higher there. For decks, and looking at that, a basic wood, not ignition resistant, that's in the neighborhood of 25 to $30 a square foot. And yeah, it's a lot more expensive than siding because you've got all the support structure underneath it. Next one up is kind of the base level of ignition resistant, which is the composites like the Trex and things like that, in the neighborhood 30 to $40 a square foot. And I found a big difference on this one. It really depends on which contractor I talk to. Some have crews just for that and they come in and knock it out real fast. Some do it themselves and it takes a little longer and probably paying a little bit higher price. Just depends on how they're doing it. If you've got the money and you want to do something like Ipe, which is ignition resistant wood, if you really want the wood deck, then you're getting up over $50 a square foot to do that. Fire sprinkler systems on a new build. These are the National Fire Protection Association standard 13D, which is what we see most in the residential systems. A basic house up here, and I mean really basic house, no vaulted ceilings, no funky corners and weird rooms that we all like, in the $5 to $6 a square foot range. And that's higher than down below, partly because we don't have any contractors that are putting those systems in that live up here. So you're paying a premium for transport. Also, our climate prices start to go up more because you're required to have antifreeze in the systems because the just can't insulate them well enough. We also, every house I've been into lately, all the new builds have big vaulted ceilings, and that takes more time and more materials to get those sprinkler systems into those locations. I've seen some places that have had to hire rent lifts to bring in, and that so we can get up and work on some of them. So yeah, ours definitely get more expensive than the national average. Actually, the national average is probably more than $3 or $4 a square foot. So the 1 to 2 that I list there probably isn't real accurate anymore. So they can get expensive, but again, if you want those nicer things, well, unfortunately, that means you got to pay for it. So that's what I had on cost for that. One thing of interest is that the generic 2018 fire code, there's very little in it that will affect any of the businesses in Nederland. As a matter of fact, a shop like yours, Kathleen, there's zero change. It won't affect anything at all. There is a change in the requirement for CO detectors in daycares and schools. Most of them already have that. They don't need to put in any kind of elaborate system. They can just use a plug-in type detector like a lot of us have in our homes already. So that's what I have on costs. Anything else?
Kathleen, do you have any questions? Okay. It's in the chat, Rick, too.
Let me find that.
She says, I'm curious as to the document saying it's cheaper to build fire resistant. However, when I talk to contractors, I hear the opposite. When I look myself, I find it is more expensive on all fronts. I'm not worried about myself. I'm worried about all the people who don't pay attention or attend these meetings. With the winds up here, I think it cut off Kathleen, so I'm guessing maybe you're sending more.
Okay, yeah, I don't have any information other than that's what was we received, and it's available online. Certain parts of it are more expensive. There's no question about that. Like what we're already requiring the highest level of roof construction that's available. So that's kind of a fixed cost. And we require that throughout town. It's not just in wildfire areas.
She said, with the winds up here, I think we need to all just deal with a safe exit out of town. If we need to leave, I think expecting to save people's homes is a fantasy.
Well, there's certainly some validity to that. However, as we've seen, houses that are better prepared, have better defensible space, have better ignition resistant exteriors are ones that are more likely to be what we call standalone. That's where it'll probably survive without any intervention. Others, or maybe just a little bit of work to prep them. And I think the thing that you keep in mind is it really depends on the fire. If we're talking a fire like East Troublesome, the day it went 100,000 acres, you're absolutely right. There's not a thing we're going to be able to do. But although those are becoming more common, still most of the fires that we have are much less intense than that. And those are the ones where we have that fighting chance. And the more that somebody's done to their house and around the house, the more likely it is that we can actually do something.
She says, I agree, but if we are all clear in the areas around our structures, we should be okay, in my opinion.
Well,
I do not know. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, what we've seen over the West in the last couple of years is it's not the wall of fire that's burning down houses. It is the embers. And the embers, if you've seen pictures from these most recent fires, you'll see aerial pictures where the house is burned down and all the trees around are still green, even months later. So the trees are still fine. And it's the embers finding a receptive fuel bed, which is the house, because it's just another fuel. And by hardening the house, you really prevent those kind of ignitions.
I know, obviously there's just conversations too about the importance of mitigation and today, Aaron and I had a conversation with the Boulder County building official, and we talked about that the defensible space and the importance of that, and really collaborating with wildfire partners and organizations of that sort. So I think, there is interest, and I've talked with Rick about this numerous times of, focusing on educational programs related to mitigation. Now, Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, obviously doing fire resistant material just helps them in addition to your mitigation efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just a different kind of fire spread, and it's one that we're seeing more commonly in the last couple of years.
Are there other areas, and you may be typing, Kathleen, so I guess I'll just pose this question too, are there other areas of interest? She says, yes, except I worry about affordable housing. So we have talked a bit about that too, and recognize that, there for things like energy efficient homes and fire resistant material, there absolutely is that cost up front. Kind of the hope in being able to gain more data from other organizations is, what is that upfront cost versus kind of the long term. If you have a more energy efficient home, ultimately you're saving money. And so we're trying to get some of that data that helps to show kind of that short term versus long term expense, to help kind of demonstrate how, well, yes, you're going to spend that money, like in this last slide Rick has, you spend a lot of that money up front, you'll see the cost savings later.
Miranda, can you back up?
Kathleen, I wanted to also mention about some money that is available through the state, and it's a mix of both state and federal funds that is available for both homeowners, so somebody who's a first-time home buyer, or they are wanting to upgrade or modify their home based on things like, a new code. And for developers who are working on building multifamily projects, there is funding available that's both very low interest loans and also grant money for things like down payment assistance. So through the Division of Housing of the Department of Local Affairs, along with the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. And also Cynthia does have an update on all the stuff that's happened towards affordable housing, like the mixed use ordinance that was passed and the different work the Planning Commission and Board of Trustees have done over the last 10 years or so. If you'd like her to go through that as well, she could.
Plus, one of the areas of potential opportunity, Kathleen, is as you can see, they passed on this page, they passed the administrative review of under 4 units, the accessory dwelling units regulation, and then Boulder County Housing Authority did put up the 26 unit. But the next slide after this talks about at the very bottom, it says financial incentives for affordable housing. So the long-term rental, the financial incentives for affordable, one I hadn't added to these slides, which was a overlay zoning. That things the Board of Trustees didn't, and the Planning Commission didn't make any traction on. So the financial incentives for affordable housing, that may be something they want to consider. The challenge on the town's end is that 80% of the building permit fees for plan review, the permit fee, pretty much all the fees that aren't hard town fees or utilities, they get 80% of the town's building permitting for the plan review and inspection services. There's an incredible amount of liability for plan review. It's actually higher reviews than it is inspectors, but there's a lot of liability to that. And that is something they hadn't talked about, was financial incentives for affordable housing, if there are opportunities for that. And then she had asked, how much did Ned make for affordable housing off of the STR tax collection? Can I ask you that, Miranda?
So we've received to date from the Q3 and Q4. We haven't received all the payments for Q4. Currently, we're at 4,500. I anticipate when all of the 2020 payments are done, we'll be looking at $6,000. They have until March 31st to pay October through December 2020's fees.
I also wanted to mention, Kathleen, that I know you're attending some of the meetings, but the Envision 2030 Housing Committee is looking at the potential for some incentivizing for affordable housing. So hopefully that will be included in the documentation and the discussion, the final discussion about Envision 2030 that will then inform the Board of Trustees and the Planning Commission on the potential for that for the town. There's lots of different ways that that's been done in various communities in the state.
To your question about the company, so we did have a contract that was 6,000, so it would cover that in its entirety. Now we're also looking at, but that comes out of the clerk's budget. We did decrease the services we use through host compliance, so now the contract is $4,500 a year. Actually, $4,200 a year.
And Miranda, were we thinking that because of COVID, we're just seeing much less STR uses?
Correct. And a lot of people, in response to the ordinance, did opt to turn into long-term rental and or sell their homes. But there is a significant decline. There was a time in which short-term rentals were not allowed to operate, and that was during the time which occupational tax was collected. So I do anticipate when we return back to somewhat normal, we'll see an increase in the number of rentals for the homes. And I just want to go back to the kind of host compliance. So it comes out of the clerk's budget. So the money from the occupational tax does not offset that. It's because that money goes straight into that, the funding for health and human services and the police department. And so it just, by decreasing the contract, it just was a lesser expense from the clerk's department.
Do you have any other questions, Kathleen, or are you feeling like you're good?
Kathleen, I wanted to make a quick mention of something that I didn't get to say. This is Cynthia. And when we had done our community planning for wildfire assistance, they had a great video. I've tried to find it on YouTube and I haven't, but the fire lab up in Montana, they would build these structures and shoot embers at them. And they have a duplex. One side has materials that are non-combustible. The other side doesn't have any of that. And they're shooting embers at both of them. In the time that it takes the side that was built with the non-combustible and those reduced wildfire elements, that other side of the structure, it's one building, is already on fire and starting to climb into the attic. And Rick would remember that as well. In terms of, I think defensible space is humongous. I think it's a really, really major important thing here, and I'm glad you mentioned it. But I do think there is a legitimate reality of reducing it with the potential building materials. So they also had a video of embers from an actual fire, and they had footage from a fire, I think it was in California, and there were embers that had gone through the deck. There was vegetation that was growing underneath the ground floor deck. The embers came through, and it had been smoldering for a while as the fire personnel were throughout the subdivision trying to put out fires. and a good deal of the deck through smoldering underneath where they couldn't even see it. And they didn't want to destroy the deck, but ultimately they had to in order to get the fire out. So it had been smoking for a while. And I just thought those were really powerful videos for me to see and to think about those things with the materials themselves. I do understand the considerable costs of considering these things, investment into a property, into the building, into the business, whatever it may be. There are considerations for that, but I do think there's there's a strong validity to it, especially when we come out of such an intense wildfire year last year.
One other thing.
If I could find, I would love to share it because it is really powerful stuff.
So I don't sit the others. She has a message, which is I get that, but most of the homes up here are wood and will burn. I thought this was only for new builds and new additions, so most houses will burn. I am more concerned about saving lives than saving structures. No other specific questions. Feel free to continue with whatever you were planning. So Kathleen, one thing I want to point out is in response to your comment on Facebook, I did create a separate building code page on our website. And so I'll email you this PowerPoint after we're done, but here's the link to how you'll get directly to that. And then also if you go to our home page on the right-hand side, you'll see the icon here at the bottom to get to the building code. And so all the information that was originally in that public Charrette post has been moved to that official page, and we'll continue to update that, kind of similar to Envision and GoCo. We'll continue to add the most recent information to those site pages. So thank you for that feedback, and that is now where everything is housed.
I've got one other thing as well. There's a lot of houses that have been built over the years that are already built to these standards. The town code requires that you meet this code already if you're building a house that's within 5 feet of a property line. So any of those houses should already have that. I built my house 17 years ago, and it's built to that standard as well. And it was my builder who was pushing it. It wasn't, and I accepted it completely. So going back that far, people, at least that far, people have been doing this already. So you're right. There's a lot of houses that don't fit in or haven't had this done. And you're right. Some of those are going to burn. And for a lot of people, the best bet's still going to be just to get out. But the more we get, the better off we are in the long term.
Kathleen says, and I question the concrete siding when concrete is not environmentally friendly. Goes against for our comp plans. So I know too, as a part of kind of the green, so at the Board of Trustees meeting, there was a conversation about green building materials, and orientation of buildings. So I think what we're trying to do is do a combination of this International Green Construction Code along with fire resistant material to determine what's, what are the options that are both sustainable and fire resistant. And so we did include this link here in this on this packet, and then also on the website I just showed you, we'll have this link to these codes as well, so people can also read up on them. But our team is currently specifically Sab and Garrett are working on those comparisons. And Kathleen, I don't want to cut you off or anything. I think we were in about 10 minutes. We were planning to switch. It's a different link for the Board of Trustees meeting. So we're planning to switch to that, but we've got about 10 more minutes if there are other questions or things you'd like more information on. We'll just kind of wait and see if you throw anything into the chat here. She says, I'm good. It sounds like this is happening no matter anyone's opinion outside of who has been planning this. That's all for me. So there is going to be information at the April 6th meeting. We are looking into kind of different ways to continue to look into and incorporate public feedback. So we're definitely interested in hearing what you have to say and anticipate trying to pull together some more charrettes. And so additional information to come, and we'll provide that update at the April 6th Board of Trustees meeting. So there's been a lot of questions. Kathleen's question is, has anyone suggested anything that has contributed to this? There's been a lot of talk about affordable housing from our other charrettes and the people who attended that. That's obviously a big area of focus. And so we're really turning back to the Housing and Vision subcommittee to really identify what are they working on and how can we be sure building code helps to mirror and support the Envision goals. So we're looking to collaborate more. So far, between all of the charrettes, we've had 5 people. You're the 5th. We had 2 people join us yesterday and 2 people join us this morning. So obviously there's a need for additional public feedback, and we discussed that as an administrative committee this morning as well. And so we're looking at ways in which we can modify our kind of plan of approach to get more of that public engagement, because as you are noting here, 5 is not enough to get that public feedback. And so looking at ways in which we can do more targeted efforts of getting input from people about the recommended changes to the code. All right, thanks, Kathleen. So I'll go ahead and send you a copy of this. This is also on the website because it's what we review with the Board of Trustees. But if there's other questions that come up, let us know. Otherwise, we'll send an update to the people who did attend the charrette as we continue to work on kind of drafting and revising our plan of attack for the 2018 building code. We'll be sure to include the members of the charrette and would ask that as you talk to people, if they have additional feedback, to check out our website and to send us any thoughts that they have. I think I will go ahead and end this meeting unless, Eric, there's anything for you so I can get the next one started.
No, I'll see you all on the other side.
See you in a moment. Cindy, do you want to stop recording first?